Today we're joined by Chris Amani, who's the CEO of Terraform Labs. Our conversation with Chris unfolds in two parts. Initially recorded on January 17th, we begin by catching up on all the latest developments and the new strategic direction of the Terra ecosystem following its collapse in May 2022. But intriguingly, just days after our initial dialogue, Terraform Labs announced its filing for bankruptcy. So after the main interview, there is a shorter follow-up where we delve into the intricacies of this voluntary decision and explore the potential implications and expected outcomes stemming from this voluntary bankruptcy filing. For a detailed breakdown of the conversation, please refer to the description below. Here we are with Chris Amani, CEO of Terraform Labs. Chris, I'm so excited to have you on the Defiant podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so, I'm just very interested in this story. Of course, Terra was one of the biggest projects, chains, stablecoins, or the platform for one of the biggest stablecoins out there. We all know the very just spectacular collapse of it all. And so now you're at the front of the new Terra, and I'm just very curious to hear what the latest of this ecosystem is. I think, after the collapse, most of us weren't sure where the project was going. And so, I'm very excited to hear kind of this potential rebirth of it or evolution of it, I guess.
So I wonder, absolutely. I can walk you through that. And it might make sense to go back a little bit to the DPEG and talk a little bit about what happened there and then how we came up with the decision to relaunch, essentially. So, a little bit of background on me. Prior to joining TFL, I was in Web 2. Web 2, I did gaming, electronic arts, Singa, MongoDB for B2B, so kind of like a variety of different backgrounds in Web 2. I started getting interested in crypto around the same time that I was at a company called Humanity, where I was the COO, and Humanity started to go through some challenging times. I took over from the founder as CEO. We saved that company and sold it off to a private equity-backed platform. I worked for them for a little bit, but like all through that process, I was following everything that was going on in crypto. So I was there for like the ICO boom, and then the bear market, and then kind of the new bull market that emerged. And having just sold my company, I was looking for a way to get involved because I saw these tokens as like a new business model for acquiring customers, and I wanted to learn more about it and try to find some way to work in the industry. And so I was obviously super familiar with Ethereum already, but was starting to look at some of the other ecosystems. And I actually saw your interview with Do Kwon. I think it was in 2021. And that was around the time that I was learning about the Terra ecosystem, and it really resonated with me. And like the vision for UST back at that point was very much about like real world adoption, about building something useful. And it felt like a project I wanted to get involved in, even kind of stablecoin aside, just kind of like the ethos of it, that it was plugged into the real world with Chai, and that he was going to try to do something beyond just kind of yield farming. And so I started to get involved in that community. I had a podcast in that community for a little bit. I started showing up to events. I got to know Do over time. And eventually we had a conversation about how, he was kind of overwhelmed with trying to run the company and be kind of like this front person and the public face of the entire ecosystem. And we had a conversation about joining in like a COO capacity. And so I joined in, I guess it was about 2 years ago now. Yeah, about 6 months before the DPEG in 2022, December 2022. That would have been 2021. I always get my years confused. I'm terrible at dates. But I joined, it was like the December before the DPEG. I joined as the COO. And was just kind of getting settled and getting comfortable with working with Do and helping him run the company when the DPEG happened. And so,
incredible.
Well, first off, just want to say that I'm so glad that we at the Defiant had a part to play in your crypto journey. I'm glad the interview with Do was useful. We were one of the the first outlets to interview him. Like this was like pretty early on in like the Terra journey, and yeah, like at the time it was all about chai, about real use cases. So yeah, we'll obviously link to that so people can go and rewatch it. But so you came on to help Do run the company, as he was like the public facing figure. You came on as COO, and then shortly after you joined, you had this kind of unraveling of UST. So yeah, can you go through what that day was like? Were you together with Do kind of in the same office? Like what was the atmosphere like in the Terra team?
Yeah, so the TFL team was spread all over the world, and so Do was located in Singapore. I'm in the U.S. We just happened to be flying people in from our leadership team that weekend before it happened, and so we were a lot of our leadership team was in the air when the DPEG started to happen, or when like the very first phases of it started to happen, and we were all there together in Singapore, kind of at the same hotel, kind of sitting in the same lobby. We even had conference rooms booked because we were going to be doing planning sessions and we were getting ready for the next year. So we were all there when it happened. So I wasn't in the room with Do specifically when he was defending the PEG. We were all kind of in the lobby outside, just kind of watching everything happening and kind of learning about things as when everyone else did. But yeah, it was an intense moment. There were a lot of people who had dedicated a lot of time to Terra, sitting in that kind of hotel lobby, waiting to see what would happen. And as it became more and more clear that it wasn't going to repeg, it was just kind of utter devastation. And so it wasn't just about kind of like the TFL employees that were all there together. It was also, you're getting messages from community members and builders. And there's this entire, Luna had a massive ecosystem at that time, and probably I would say one of the most rabid and kind of engaged communities in crypto. And so it wasn't just that, it was like all of the stakeholders, right? And we were all kind of experiencing this together at the same time. And, I think everyone who was involved with Terra understood the risk of the DPEG, and we can talk a little more about that, right? I think everyone in crypto understood the risks of the death spiral. I think we all assigned different probabilities to it, but it was well discussed and understood. And so we always knew, when I joined TFL, I always knew that there was going to be this risk of financial loss and of something like this happening, right? It was a real thing. But I don't think I was pretty naive about what the fallout would be, just in terms of the emotions behind it, like the money aside, right? But the emotional loss, the amount of people who had dedicated kind of their careers and had left good jobs to come work on this, as builders, all of the people in the community who had been, talking about this to their friends and their family and what that meant. So that was kind of a heavy moment when that all came to a head. And then, even with all of that, I was still pretty naive about like the legal fallout that would come next, right? And we've all seen what's happened since, and we can talk about that a little bit as well. It was like a moment of kind of coming to terms with that life was going to be different now in a pretty meaningful way. This wasn't just a financial loss. It was going to be hard to explain this to friends and family and community members and everything. So there was kind of definitely a grieving period as we sat in that hotel lobby and watched it all, watch the DPEG kind of finalize.
Because the unraveling of it was just so immediate. I guess it was pretty clear very early on that it was an unsalvageable situation, right? It's like the TVL on Terra went from 20 billion to practically zero in like a day, or like, I don't know.
There were some initial DPEGs and it looked like it had recovered, and then there was just a waterfall. So God, I have PTSD about it, so I don't remember exactly how many days it took, but it was it happened over the matter of, I would say, probably 3 days. But when that final DPEG happened, it happened quick. Yeah, it was 24 hours, 36 hours max, and it was over. And I just don't think anyone, I don't think anyone's ever seen anything like that before.
Yeah, no,
That amount, something that big fail that quickly. And so, even in the worlds, I get kind of in the worlds what I'd imagine that happening and had prepared myself for it, it still just felt so much different and so much faster in real time than I would have ever imagined.
I can't imagine. I mean, what was, the atmosphere like in the team? Like, were you at the time, were all of you just, thinking the project was over, like looking at alternatives on like what to do next? What was there anger? And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, so by the time it was over, that was when I finally saw Doe, and he had been up for however many days in a row, trying to save this thing. Obviously, he believed it and loved it more than anyone, right? Which I think gets lost in the current conversation about Doe. But I think like Doe immediately, it was like, he came to where we were. We had this conference room, and it was immediately like, okay, so what's next? What are we going to do next? And it's hard to like put yourself back in the perspective of what was happening at that time. But I've had to do it multiple. I've had to like go rewind and like, I've gone back and listened to like, okay, what were the podcasts I was listening to around that time? Like, what was the feel of the market? And the feel of the market it was like layer one season, right? And Terra was always unique in that it was like this layer one ecosystem, but it also had this stablecoin mechanism built into it. And so it wasn't like all of the other layer ones. It was built with a purpose. But the idea at the time was, well, we've got one of the most rabid communities in crypto. We have an ecosystem of builders who are devastated right now. There's no reason why we can't take everything that we have in both of those and try to salvage this and at least compete head to head as a layer one, using the Cosmos SDK, and see if we can, like, which of these protocols still make sense without a decentralized stablecoin, and just try to capture all of the energy. Like all of the other shoes had not dropped at that point, right? So it didn't seem kind of crazy that we would be able to pull that off. Maybe it was crazy, but we didn't think it was crazy because, no, I mean, there was a little bit of anger in the community just because there were like allegations coming out that ultimately were like unfounded, but that there were misappropriation of LFG funds or things like that weren't true. But no, I would say, look, I mean, like the Terra community understood all of these risks. I don't know if you remember, but we had recently raised this massive LFG round specifically to diversify the capital backing UST and to like defend the peg in a situation like this. So like everyone was aware of this possibility. I think a lot of people, when that LFG fund were raised, thought, oh, that's it. Like we've got this Bitcoin backing now. There's no way this thing is going to fail. I think a lot of people emotionally moved on from some of the risk maybe. And it turned out that wasn't enough to defend the peg. And there's all kinds of conversations you could have about that. But yeah, I think like within the community and the ecosystem, it was just like, so what are we going to do next? Like, are we just going to die? Or are we going to, try to fight on? And Doe was kind of the tip of the spear on that. Like he was, I don't think he had slept in days, but he was kind of right back in the war room, talking to ecosystem teams, talking to the community. And ultimately, like, it was like, what do we want to do next? TFL was left over with Treasury from after the DPEG. The vast majority of our Treasury was in UST. And obviously that was wiped out, but there were just like assets in flight and different types of assets we had. So we had enough left in the tank and still have enough left in the tank to try to rebuild the ecosystem and compete at a high level, I think, in terms of being able to attract builders and infrastructure and everything like that. And so ultimately that was like the overwhelming consensus from the community, from the ecosystem of builders, was relaunch the chain, airdrop the tokens to people who lost money on Luna, and TFL already has its treasury, so it didn't take any of the tokens from the Genesis block. So all of the Genesis block was either given out to people who held Luna or UST, or it was put in a community pool, and like use TFL's treasury to try to build it back and like do the best we can to build something out of this. And so that's what we did. And that was a community vote. We put that to a community vote, like all of the discussions still out there on Agora. And that's what we tried to do. And like a large portion of the tokens from relaunching Terra went to the projects and the builders who had kind of like dedicated themselves to building on Terra. And you can find probably 20, 30 examples of teams like that are still building. They might have left Terra after everything else that's happened since, and a lot has changed since all of the positive, like we're going to rebuild this and everything's going to go great. Some of those teams have left Terra, but a lot of them are still building. They're like the best builders in the Cosmos ecosystem, whether it's the Skip team, the TFM team, Levana Protocol, Astroport. So like a lot of those, and I don't know which of those teams wouldn't have survived without the relaunch of Terra, but I know a lot of them wouldn't have. So yeah, there's still a lot of positive that came out of that original relaunch. And then I would say, from the Terra perspective and the Terra community perspective, what happened next was just like an onslaught of legal filings, right? Governments coming after us, governments coming after Doe, like kind of grifters on the internet making up false allegations about us that we couldn't really respond to because we're in the middle of all these legal proceedings. And that really just kind of blunted our momentum. And, from there, we've just been, ever since, heads down. At that point, we kind of decided to go kind of internal a little bit, heads down, build for like our more rabid, smaller community, stay out of the headlines, until we had something interesting and useful for people to use again. And so that's kind of where we've gotten today. And we still have, I want to say, like, there's still like 20 people left on the team from prior to the DPEG, which, we were only a 100-person team. So, I mean, like, we lost a lot of people, but I think it's more than people would expect, given everything that's happened.
So interesting. I think it does sound a bit crazy that, the day after, or like right in the aftermath of the collapse of UST, Doe and the team and the community was already thinking about a relaunch. I think that just like speaks to this like rabid and fan base, and just like this really strong belief in Terra itself.
Yeah. And I think like Doe gets so much grief, right? And there are two reasons why. Number one, he was rude to people on Twitter. And so, some people are, and so like he had this persona that he used on Twitter, and that's come back to haunt him a little bit when things failed, right? Because he was so, I'll say it, he was overly arrogant about something that ended up failing. And so people were kind of happy when they saw his demise. And then now, there are all these allegations against him that he's not in a position to respond to. And so, but I think if you talk to like the community and the ecosystem of builders who were all there, they don't see Doe as a villain. They see him as a martyr, essentially. And the work he did kind of after that DPEG to try to hold things together and get teams the funding they needed to survive, and to try to hold that community together, it was like heroic in some ways. And I think like he's who inspired a lot of us to kind of stick. It was kind of like inspiring for us to stick with him and try to help him dig his way out of this hole, So yeah, he was an incredibly resilient person during that period. But then also, like the community was just incredibly resilient as well. It's kind of amazing. Like all of our same like kind of key community participants are still here. The validators are still here. The builders are coming back. So it's just been a kind of a super resilient community and ecosystem overall.
Just to provide a bit more background for listeners who, maybe don't know all the details or forgot what happened at the time, but I guess like in just like very basic terms, Terra was a blockchain which had a volatile asset, Luna, and a stablecoin, UST, and this stablecoin was backed by Luna, by the same token of the chain. Which was risky, like most stablecoins are backed by US dollars or over collateralized with Ethereum and other stablecoins in the case of DAI. But UST was backed purely by Luna. And so this death spiral that Chris is referring to here is this: there was this risk that if Luna started really falling very quickly, there would be a situation where it would be really hard to arbitrage the stable coin back to the $1 peg, with like the mechanism of like, I don't know, like buying and selling Luna in the background to make up for that DPEG. So that's essentially what happened. Like Luna, the price of Luna fell too quickly, and then that caused UST to fall below the $1 peg, and then there was just like this loss of confidence that peg would be regained, and so Luna just kept falling lower and lower and lower. The peg kept falling below, further below $1, and then it just like simply never recovered. And this was a multi-billion-dollar market cap stablecoin, so it was just like the crash was just incredible to see, like such a huge asset just like fall from billions to zero. And so I think that's kind of when you look at it on a superficial level, you see this huge project falling, and the first thing you do is obviously blame the face of it, which is Do. I mean, who is Do? And at the time when like you had like all these implosions happen, you had Terra, then you had Three Arrows, then you had FTX. I think it was easy to put everything on the same level, like on the same basket. And so you talk about just like the huge crypto failures of 2022, and it was like, it's like Terra and FTX, and of course like Sam Bankman-Fried was, you know, he actually committed real fraud, like he stole people's money. But personally, I don't think that it's fair to put Do Kwon on the same level. I think it's, you know, Do Kwon maybe was responsible for a very risky mechanism to peg a stable coin, which, you know, people knew that was the case, and then that mechanism failed. But I don't think it's the same as saying, okay, like, you know, SBF took people's money from his exchange to like gamble it on his hedge fund. Like that's just like a very different level of failure here that we're talking about. So yeah, I think, you know, it's important to put that into context, because when you say Terra, you remember this like huge collapse of a crypto project, but it's important to remember, like it's this mechanism that failed. Maybe the risks weren't communicated. Maybe, I don't know, there's like different things you can say, but I don't think it's fair to say it was fraud. So there's like a line there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think like so much to say, because I've been living this for 2 years, right? And I have to think about how to explain it to friends and family and my kids. And, you know, in hindsight, should it ever have existed, right? Was it always too risky? Was it always doomed to fail? I think is a conversation worth having. I think that I believe that TFL was pretty transparent about the risks. And I think like that, you just go back, and if you really go back and listen to, which I've had to do, because I've had to remind myself, like, why did I was involved in this massive failure, and this thing was clearly risky, and what drew me to it in the first place. And if you go back, and so I went back and I listened to your interview again and some of the other ones he did. And you know that you can, there's so many examples of kind of him explaining the mechanism and how it works. But I think ultimately there's just no pattern recognition for when something this massive implodes this quickly and there wasn't something wrong, right? Because there's never been something that got as big as Terra that failed that was just a purely open source protocol. This was the first of its kind. And so I think it's fair that TFL gets scrutiny, and right, like there are questions to answer, right, when something like that happens, right? And so, you know, that's part of like the trial that's coming up with the SEC. Like we want people to cover it. And so like we've cooperated, we've submitted documents to the SEC investigation. and all the evidence will be presented, and people will be able to make up their own mind. And so, but I totally agree. Like, just at the base level, TFL never took anyone's money. We didn't take people's money and spend it inappropriately. TFL created an open source project, and even the awkward thing about it is, even when it failed, it worked as it was supposed to, right? Like, the mechanism was working the entire time, exactly as advertised. And so, yeah, we definitely, I think it's shorthand, right? Because for people to throw Terra and FTX and Three Arrows into the same box, but yeah, they're very, very different things. And that's why we've been able to hold a team together. That's why we've been able to hold an ecosystem together, a community together, and why, we're still, we have a long way to go to kind of rebuild our reputation and to get our products back kind of on the main stage of crypto, but we're making incremental progress and have things we're proud of. But yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that there's a difference between those situations.
Yeah, and it's so interesting what you mentioned about the protocol working as intended, even as it was failing. At the time, when we covered Terra on the Defiant, I always made the point to say, even with this massive collapse, it still, I think, supports the idea that DeFi is better. Because while, Terra was falling and collapsing, it was fully transparent. Like, you saw it happen real time. You saw the DPEG, you saw the TVL dropping, and everything was there before your eyes. Like, I guess you could argue I think the one thing that wasn't transparent was the LFG fund. And I guess that's why there are more questions around what happened there. But barring that, everything else, like the protocol itself, everything was just like unraveling before everyone's eyes, and people were able to sell UST, to sell Luna immediately. You're able to really take control over your assets if you were involved with Terra and Anchor, right?
It's crypto. That's how it works, right? Like, things are allowed to fail, and it's in stark contrast, I think, to like the Silicon Valley Bank failure we saw, where the first people who got their money out were the people whose VCs were in the know about what was happening, right? And so your startup was able to get your money, and ultimately the government just bailed them out completely. But people had privileged access, right, to information that they could use to get out, and that's like the financial system that we were trying to replace with crypto. And and you're right. And it all happened transparently. Again, I agree with your point, by the way. And I think Doe would agree that LFG was not properly decentralized at the time. It was like a progressive decentralization situation with getting those funds in a place where people could see them being deployed to defend the peg. We have, by the way, if anyone's interested, got a third-party audit report of everything that was done during the DPEG defense that we can share, and you can find on Terra's Twitter feed that goes through in like wallet level detail, like every transaction that was made on behalf of Peg Defense. So we have been able to provide clarity on that after the fact. But again, it would have been better if like there were mechanisms in place where like that LFG Peg Defense was happening completely transparently. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. But I was going to make the comparison with FTX, where users of FTX weren't able to get their money out for, I don't know, months, while and not only that, but the reason why the whole FTX thing exploded was because of a news report on FTX balance sheet. So it's kind of this lack of transparency of CeFi and TradFi versus full transparency of DeFi. So I think that that point is worth highlighting when talking about Terra. It was like a spectacular collapse. Maybe it was too risky to begin with, but it was at least fully transparent, and people using the protocol were always in control of their own funds. So I think that's definitely worth highlighting.
Yeah, and by like making that distinction, I don't want to come across as saying this wasn't a massive failure and that it wasn't tragic and devastating. And so, and again, I just want to reiterate, like, I think TFL deserves scrutiny. And, unfortunately, just because of all the legal stuff, we're not able to like have the conversation as publicly as we want to now. But that's kind of why we want people to cover and look at this SEC case, because it's the first time that, both sides will be able to present evidence. Right. And I think we all know in crypto at this point, no one should take my word for it about what happened, for like the things that are still left unresolved. You have to kind of verify on your own. And so we're excited. I think once that trial's over, some of the other things that are still outstanding, we'll be able to more directly address as well.
And can you give me an overview on like what the crux of the trial is going to be about? Like what are the charges, and if you can say kind of what are the arguments that TFL is making?
Yeah, so what I can do is I can tell you the allegations, and then I'm going to have to leave it to the trial to let that be litigated. It's just not practical for me to try to do that here. But here there are really two prongs to the SEC's case against Terraform Labs and Doe. The first is that the tokens were securities, and that's Luna, Mirror, and UST. And we fundamentally don't believe that those tokens are securities. And in the most extreme version, we don't believe that UST, a stablecoin, was a security. The SEC's already won a summary judgment on that, and so that's essentially, at least at the first level, resolved, and that those were securities. And so now what's pending are the fraud allegations, which is like the second set of allegations against TFL. And those essentially fall into two buckets. I can't get too in the weeds on those, but one is that there were misrepresentations made about the May 2021 DPEG. This was like the DPEG that happened before, I think it was 2021. Again, I'm terrible with the years. There was a DPEG that happened that UST recovered from prior to the one that was a full collapse. And so evidence will be presented at trial about that. And everyone, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince anyone what's true or not. Like, I hope that people look at the evidence that gets presented at trial. And then the second one was a pretty big allegation that UST never, and that Terra never used, and Chai were never connected to the blockchain. The Chai never used the blockchain. And so that's the other one that will be litigated. And again, I'll have to refrain from commenting on those. I can say that we think kind of the fraud allegations are without merit, but as to the evidence for that, you shouldn't take my word for it. You should, evaluate for yourself at the trial. The trial was actually supposed to happen here in a couple of weeks, but it got pushed back to, I believe, March 25th. So it'll be a couple more months before all of that's out. Yeah,
we'll definitely be covering it. And one follow-up question on this securities issue. You said the SEC found that UST was a security, but did it say anything about Luna and Mirror?
Oh, no. The judge ruled in summary judgment that all three were securities.
All three. Okay.
Yeah. But as you know, like there's two separate conversations to be had there, right? Like Mirror and Luna and UST are two very different types of tokens. We fundamentally don't believe that stable coins are securities. And I think that most of the crypto industry agrees with us, whether you love Terra or not, right? And so that was something we were hoping to be able to have sorted out in trial, but it was settled in summary judgment.
And just in like practical terms, how does this trial affect just like the ongoing operation of Terra?
We've known that this trial was coming. This has been out there for a while. We've been preparing. So yeah, we just continue to build. It's, one more potential obstacle to get over. But like our team's pretty resilient at this point. Our community's pretty resilient at this point. So we're pretty excited about like what we've been able to do so far, just given everything that's happened in the last, is it really 2 years? Yeah. Everything that's happened in the last couple of years. So, this is just one more hurdle to get over is the way we look at it. I think a lot of people in the company we're looking forward to it because it's finally our chance to present our side of the story. And we haven't been able to do that. I still can't do it today. Right. And, regardless of what happens, that will be therapeutic in some way.
But like legally, it's not preventing you from operating the existing Terra chain. Like you can continue just like,
we can continue
running it.
We can. And the Terra ecosystem is pretty decentralized at this point. So the chain can run on its own with the validators. TFL plays a big role in kind of marketing the chain, and TFL has always played a role in building applications on the chain, as you know, from Mirror, Anchor, Station. We had our own wallet. And so we play a big role in helping push it forward. But even if like TFL were to shut down, I think the chain would continue on. It would just be a matter of like which organizations would be able to step up and fill that gap. There's a fairly large community pool that could still be drawn on that could fund development of the ecosystem, even if TFL were to no longer exist. But we're confident. We're confident we'll survive this and continue to support the ecosystem.
Okay, so after this, vote was passed that you'd relaunch Terra. So what's happened since? So you essentially launched a new Terra chain as a Cosmos SDK without a stablecoin. I mean, I guess like that's the main difference with like
that's
Terra
right.
Classic, and then a la Ethereum, you still have the Terra Classic chain that's alive.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can go over all of that.
Yeah, I can walk through that. So we launched the community. So on the old Terra chain, which we would call Terra Classic now, there were just a lot of things that no longer worked because so much was intertwined with that stable coin, right? And like so many mechanisms that were built into that chain were built into it because of this mint burn mechanism and the use of the stable coin. And so when we did the vote to relaunch Terra, obviously we could have stayed on that existing chain, but it just didn't make a ton of sense from a technical perspective for what we wanted to do. So we launched more of like a vanilla Cosmos SDK chain. And we left the Terra Classic chain kind of behind, right? We continued to run infrastructure for it and support it and our wallet support and everything like that. But this entire community, so this entire community like sprung up around the Terra Classic chain as well. And you can find them on Twitter. They're talking about Lunk because now it's Luna Classic. And they have varying objectives that I haven't stayed too on top of. But yeah, so they're running it. They're kind of running their own chain. They found people who can develop the chain. They want to have like their own Terra Classic community. So there's that team. And it's pretty distributed and pretty decentralized. And fun to engage with, I would say. And I still like engage with them occasionally. And, we expect to bring like Luna Classic liquidity over to Terra and make sure that our applications work with their products. And because there's like an emotional connection there. But Terra's main focus is on the new vanilla chain that was launched. And so that's where TFL develops its apps. Most of our apps are cross-chain, and so we're leveraging a lot of IBC stuff to build kind of a new type of chain abstracted application. But most of our work is or almost all of our work is focused on the new chain, and so that's the chain you would hear called Terra, and the token known as Luna now is actually the new Luna, not the old Luna. The old Luna would be Luna, LUNC or Lunk.
It's so funny that this kind of similar narrative happened on Terra than what happened on Ethereum. What's like philosophically? What's the difference between the two communities? Like, why do you think there was a part of the community that just like stayed on like the original chain?
I'm not even sure that they were necessarily. I'm not even sure that the Terra Classic community is necessarily, and again, I'm going to get a lot of grief for this, necessarily like a part of the old Terra community. I think they are primarily a new community that developed around an opportunity to try to revive this old chain. So
I see.
as far as like the builders and community members that I know and who's familiar with, they've all come over to the validators, everything like that. They've all come over to the new chain with us. But this is like I think it's kind of like a new independent community that sprung up around Terra Classic that has its own vibes and set of values. And I don't fully understand it because it's been hard enough just to kind of keep TFL alive over the last couple of years. So I haven't had time to focus too much on both, but I am getting a little more involved because they're a force. They have an engaged community just like we do. And so we see them in a lot of places. And, a lot of the applications we're building are like kind of natively cross-chain. And so we want to make sure that they get supported as well, or treated as kind of like a first-class Cosmos citizen.
Awesome. Okay. And then on the, just like the overall goal or like vision for the new Terra chain, you said initially it was about, competing head to head with other L1s. Is that still the vision?
Yeah, I would say, look, this has been challenging because there's not only, there are two major events to reckon with from a TFL perspective, right? And we've talked about one of them, and there's not a lot I can talk about the second one, but it's Doe leaving, right? And so it's one thing to relaunch Terra with Doe. Stepping in for Doe, when he stepped down, presented a whole nother set of challenges as well, because I was always kind of back office for TFL, right? And I didn't even try to get involved, even though I've run product before at other companies. I didn't even try to get involved with like our product strategy when Doe was there, because that was always his domain. And so when he stepped down, like I've had to do a lot of soul searching with the team around like, how do you even carry this thing forward? Should I even carry it forward? Am I as a person capable or even willing to try to carry it forward, right? Like filling in for Doe, like him or not, is a daunting task in the Terra community. So for me, it was really important to try to find like a common thread that connected old Terra to like what we wanted to do in the future. And I had to try to find some common thread that not only did it make sense, but was it something I could execute on? Because there are limitations I'm working with. Number one, I'm just a different person with a different set of experiences than Doe. And so the types of products that I'm familiar with building are like consumer tech, and they're a different type of product. They're more like applications and protocols, DeFi protocols. And then, secondly, like, do we have the capabilities to pull it off? And then are there things we just can't do while we're under all of this regulatory scrutiny? Like, it doesn't make sense for us to launch a token right now, right? And so like building new DeFi protocols is just kind of out of the question for TFL. So we had this set of constraints, and I wanted to kind of draw a thread between, old Terra and new Terra. And that was one of the times I went back and listened to your interview with him again, because it was like, okay, so what drew me to this in the first place? What were the core principles I can draw from? And it just reminded you that like before Anchor became so popular, it was really about usability and real world use cases and building something useful. And there was this quote that I pulled out for my Cosmoverse presentation where I was kind of reintroducing myself to the community and what our strategy was. And it was from your interview. And it's not word for word, but it was something along the lines of, it was Doe saying, I'm one of those people who believes that Wall Street exists to serve Main Street, and that capital allocated in a vacuum is meaningless. And what he was saying there was that, if we're all just trading shitcoins with each other, this doesn't matter, right? Like eventually someone has to build something useful. And he was applying that principle to the stablecoin, right? And like, in order for UST to be sustainable long-term without like this like diversified collateral backing, it had to be incredibly useful. But I think that same philosophy applies to building out a crypto ecosystem as well, right? Like there have to be end user useful applications on top of that blockchain, or it's ultimately going to fail, right? And like, we can have meme coin season. It looks like we're gonna have meme coin season every cycle, and that's cool with me as well. That's fun. But that can't be it, right? Ultimately, someone has to build a product that someone that in your real life is going to use. And I think that was Terra's mission originally. I think even with Anchor, that was its mission, was to like simplify savings into DeFi savings into this really easy product to use. And so that's kind of the thread that I pull forward, is just that we have to build things that are useful. And that's not like a super mind-blowing idea to have, right? Like everyone's trying to come up with that, right? Everyone's trying to find like what the next use case for crypto is. But we think we have a unique perspective on it. I think I bring a unique perspective. I've built a lot of applications. If you go back and look at like the company I was CEO of, we did workforce management software. And without getting too much into the weeds, it's employee scheduling and time tracking, and building those types of applications. You have to build not only for businesses, but you have to build for consumers as well. So you have to build a product that a company will buy. But you also have to give like an application and a mobile app to like the users who are being scheduled for their jobs, like something that they would like to use as well. And so I have experience kind of building applications that scale to millions of users, both from like a consumer perspective and from like a B2B perspective. And we're kind of attacking, building useful applications from that perspective. We have kind of like our consumer platforms that we're working on, and trying to bring more of like a Web 2, let's call it maybe like a Web 2.5 design and interface to the problem. And then we're also working on what we would consider kind of like our B2B like business platforms on Terra. And so, yeah, that's we think we have a unique perspective in how we can leverage kind of like cross-chain abstraction, UX, UI, maybe bring some things that are like table stakes in Web 2 applications to Web 3 applications without sacrificing like the core tenets of decentralization, such as like, you own your own keys and you have sovereignty and you have transparency, to build something that hasn't been built before. And I think if we can do that, I think that's kind of our path back to relevance, kind of broader crypto relevance. But, we're seeing great traction so far. I mean, I think we have one of the largest communities in the Cosmos ecosystem. I think we have a good suite of products that we can layer, that we can kind of package up with our blockchain infrastructure tools as well. And so, yeah, we're going to try to compete.
Is it fair to say that you're competing with the rest of layer ones, and your edge is to provide just like very consumer focused, usable apps that, bring all of the commodities, or I guess like all of the features that you come to expect in Web 2 to like a more blockchain native app?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, we're definitely competing with other layer ones. I am realistic about like the hole that we're starting from, right? Like a lot of people don't even know we still exist outside of the Cosmos ecosystem. We expect to get back on the main stage and compete at the same level that we competed before. But I am realistic that's going to take time. And in order to do that, we're going to have to build something that's actually innovative and different than what other people have built. And so it's not kind of like a, I would, if people want to see like what we're building and how we're building it differently, I would just recommend people go take a look at our new Station wallet we just launched. It's far and away, I think, the best cross-chain wallet in crypto. It abstracts away a lot of like the bridging and like chain hassle that you'd have to deal with. It gives you kind of like cross-chain. It's like basic stuff, right? Like I'm always shocked that like we have 75,000 different layer 2 scaling solutions, but I can't get a useful transaction history in my wallet, right? A cross-chain transaction history that shows like, so like in Cosmos, you can do a lot of really interesting abstracted transactions that, send a token to this chain, do a swap, and pull it back and deposit it in this protocol, right? Like there's so much great innovation going on in the Cosmos ecosystem right now around IBC. And like our Station wallet. So if you're familiar with any of those protocols, I would say go use a Station wallet and go try those like multi-hop transactions, get a sense for kind of the UX UI, the transaction histories that you can't find anywhere else. That's a really good example of just like kind of the tip of the spear of what we want to bring to crypto. And then that's kind of like what I would say is like the consumer side of things, that plus eventually consolidating that application with Pulsar, which is the portfolio tracking tool we bought. And then if you want to get a sense of it from like the B2B side, we have a product called Enterprise DAO that we've built that brings, the ability to spin up DAOs and governance to anywhere in Cosmos. So it's completely cross-chain. You can spin up a DAO. You can stake vote from any chain in Cosmos with like a really simplified UX UI. You're not bridging tokens across in order to do it. You can claim rewards to anywhere. You can spin up treasuries on any chain in Cosmos. So yeah, it's really like, I think our edge is like kind of that UX UI. I would say there's like a big difference between a protocol and an application. And right now I can't build the protocols, right? They need a token. But I can definitely build the applications that sit on top of those protocols and take advantage of like all of the great kind of bridging technology that's happening in Cosmos right now. And so, we're building that application layer. And I think in doing that, we're building out a lot of infrastructure that we can provide to all of the other teams that build on Terra that allow them to offer kind of like a differentiated user experience. And so like building the tools ourselves that support our own applications is helping us build like this, we're calling this product foundation, but it's essentially like imagine what's the product that Consensus built? Infura. It's like an Infura for Cosmos, but it has like kind of our unique perspective on what cross-chain abstraction and multi-chain transactions chained together should look like. And will allow other teams that build on Terra to kind of build the same types of applications. So we're really excited about it. We just launched our Station, our new Station Chrome extension. Station was one of the most used wallets in the last cycle, just because of how popular Anchor and Terra was. So we took that cross-chain and we're really excited about that. We're really excited about Enterprise. I think it's kind of like the smoothest cross-chain DAO creation and management solution out there. And then Enterprise kind of opens up a whole suite of kind of like of tools that make it easier to run businesses. It's not just for DAOs, it'll eventually be for protocol teams and other crypto businesses as well. It opens up like a whole suite of applications that we'll be able to offer as well, like payroll, streaming payments, vesting contracts, treasury management that works not only in Cosmos, but in Ethereum. We're working on labor markets, we're working on identity. So on all of these things, we kind of understand we have to build something differentiated because if we just try to copy paste what other people are doing and fork it on our chain, it's never going to get Terra back to relevance. So we're trying a lot of things. Some things will work, some things won't. But the best way to kind of understand it would be just to go play around with those products.
Okay, so it's like TFL is analogous to, I guess, Consensus to Ethereum, where you're building all these different infrastructure pieces for teams building on Terra to use.
Yeah, I would say like the best comparison, it's not a perfect comparison, but TFL is kind of like a combination of Ethereum Foundation plus Consensus in one organization. And it's always been that way, right? Like Doe was always incubating and spinning out projects and we're continuing to do the same thing now. So, I mean, part of the strategy now is just out of necessity, right? Like after everything that's happened, I'm not going to be able to go compete with Polygon for a business development deal to like bring some hot protocol to my chain. Like we're realistic about that. So in order to rebuild, we're going to have to show the crypto community something interesting and useful and, attract like-minded developers to our chain if it resonates. And so, yeah, that's a strategy.
Super interesting. And then you said you still have funds, right, within TFL that you're deploying to incubate these projects. But I think you also deployed these funds directly on protocols on Terra, right?
Yeah, I mean, so we have this treasury that's left over and a portion of it's going just to support TFL's operating expenses. A portion of it's going to help out ecosystem builders with like audits and, the types of expenses that might be a little too challenging up front for them to cover. But we were also able, because we're sitting on a decent amount of treasury that was idle. And so instead of like doing kind of an ill-advised incentive program to try to get other people's, I think we've all learned through the last cycle that like paying for other people's liquidity just doesn't work, right? Like it stays until you stop paying them and then it leaves, and it's nearly impossible to like do the math that would argue that it was a good ROI. So we just kind of deployed our own treasury. We've had a little bit of a cold start problem, right? Where things died so much after Doe stepped down and after all of this legal stuff that we've been through that one of two things had to happen. We either need to pay someone to like bring liquidity in and kind of like grease the wheels a little bit to get the DeFi ecosystem building again, or we had to do it ourselves. And we decided to do it ourselves. So what we did was we supplied like what we would consider like we would call it DeFi sufficient liquidity. So that's like the way I would define that is like enough liquidity so that like a money market could feel comfortable building on top of it, and that there would be enough liquidity to handle like price movements. We've been able to supply like DeFi sufficient liquidity for some of like the best tokens in all of crypto. And we're the only chain that has that level of liquidity for these types of tokens. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, BNB, and Matic, I think were the first ones we deployed. And so that just gets, and the idea there is like, okay, so now there's like a sufficient liquidity for ecosystems to start building on top of again. And since we've deployed that liquidity, we've had protocols that have come in and say, okay, we'll launch an outpost on Terra now because there are actually assets for us to work with. And it also, I mean, it's the only place in Cosmos that you can build on those types of non-Cosmos assets. We're the only ones that have been able to bring those in. And so it provides like in the short term, it provides like a little bit of like a differentiated value prop beyond kind of like the UX UI stuff and application level stuff we've been working on. I mean, and we're also working to bring Cosmos liquidity in as well through some other means, through like voting incentives on our Astroport, which is one of the largest. It is maybe the largest or one of the largest DEXs in the Cosmos ecosystem. We've had a new DEX that launched, Ura, that has more of like a velodrome model. So we'll be kind of participating in their incentives as well. And so, yeah, we're trying to kind of like re-bootstrap liquidity in the ecosystem so that builders can be successful again. And so we've had success so far. We've had to use our own money to do it, but I think that's fine. It's allowed us to kind of get an asset list on chain that's differentiated from everyone else in Cosmos.
Super interesting. Then, to start wrapping up, as you're building and, emerging from the huge collapse, there must be some just like really important lessons that you yourself and like as a team you took from what happened with UST. So what do you think those are?
Yeah, I mean, there are lessons I take from UST, and there are lessons I take from just having spent more time in crypto generally. When I joined, I was like, I'm going to learn this great new business model where you create these tokens and you can use these tokens to align incentives, and you don't, instead of, spending millions of dollars a year as a startup, advertising on Google, you kind of align incentives and you build a community, and that's how you bootstrap activity. And I think what I wish I had known at the time, or I wish I had spent more time researching, was just like really understanding the economics behind that, right? Like, and so one lesson I'd say is that, if you're really interested in a protocol, you've got to go figure out like how much protocol revenue is it generating versus the amount of money it's spending to incentivize that revenue. And token terminal is an incredible place to do this. I'm sure there are others as well to get those analytics. And then you've really got to put yourself in a space where you're like, okay, does this protocol, which sounds interesting and it sounds great and has a high success of working, but if its valuation is $5 billion and it has $10,000 of revenue, and it's spending millions of dollars a year to generate that revenue, is it ever going to find some kind of sustainable growth pattern? And I think like, look, if you're trading for the memes or you're speculating, do whatever you want. But like, I got into this because I was hoping to kind of uncover a new business model. And I think just making sure you stay informed about like the economics, the unit economics of all of these protocols is really important. And then just make sure you understand kind of what you're getting into when you participate in them. I think really understanding security risk. An APR might look juicy. It might look, 5% better than what you can get outside of DeFi. It might be marginally better, but I think we're all learning that there's like massive just smart contract risk and other things that you need to figure out how to value and incorporate into kind of your thought process as you play with these protocols. And just being kind of clear, I think, like wrapping up on both of those 2 points, and then I'll get to UST. Just like be clear. Like, are you speculating or are you really understanding this protocol and how it could eventually scale into something sustainable? As it relates to UST, I mean, I think my biggest takeaway is that decentralized stablecoins should always be collateralized fully by safe collateral. I don't think we need to run this experiment again. You know, people in crypto typically have short memories. I don't, because I've had to live this so viscerally. I believe like the mission of UST was pure. It was only by doing it this way that we could have created something truly 100% decentralized and uncensorable. But I fail to see how it could work long term without full collateral backing or being over collateralized. So that's lesson number one. I think lesson number two, I think for me is, this isn't the same as other tech, right? When you're dealing with money, you have to be more careful. You have to be more diligent. And so I think, you have to be careful about everything you say, everything you do, everything you're associated with. And so, as we move forward at TFL, we've had to kind of like, it wasn't that we had like necessarily a bad culture before, but we've just had to like instill a sense of absolute diligence to be beyond reproach with everything you do, participate with, and interact with. Because people are, even if you don't mean it, even if it's not your intention, people are reacting to the signals you're sending and making decisions, and you don't ultimately want to be responsible for people misunderstanding anything.
Yeah. I think those are lessons that I hope everyone will internalize. Just anyone running a protocol should be super mindful of, it's like people's money that is going to be deployed in this thing. So I think that's what's so interesting and different about building on blockchains. It's tech, but it's intrinsically money. And so from a software developer's perspective, I think that might be something that many are not used to, right? Like you're building an app and you're making sure that it doesn't have bugs, or it's designed in the right way, but you just need to be so much more careful, because it's not, people are not going to be using this to, I don't know, upload pictures and comment on other people's whatever. They're going to be using it to do stuff with their money, with savings and so on.
Yeah, and the stakes are so much higher. And I think like if you're someone who's in like TradFi, you're looking at crypto and you're listening. If you're listening to me right now, you're like, yeah, no shit, we've been dealing with this for 100 years, right? And so my hope is just like, look, if crypto is going to achieve its potential of like democratizing the financial system, it's going to do it by only having to learn this lesson once, right? And I hope we do, so that we can build something serious that kind of befits what crypto is capable of doing in the world. Because if we're still doing this cycle after cycle after cycle, I don't know how we're gonna to get to like the outcome that we all wanted to in terms of crypto's impact on the world. So
yeah, I think that's a great insight. And then just follow up on the one of the initial points that you made. I just think it's really interesting, your observations on token business models. I'm just curious, like, do you still think that tokens provide a new business model, or is it really just like just get a useful product and and it's basically the same?
I think there's definitely a business model there, and I think there's a way to align incentives, but the way that these token deals are structured now, I don't think are that effective. And, having, been in tech for 20 years now and just seeing what real incentive alignment and just knowing so many founders who struggled for 10 years. I was talking to a founder the other day. He's 11 years into a startup and is still making paying himself like the prototypical Series A startup salary, right? And it's probably not going to work out, right? And so he put 11 years into this, and he didn't get to cash out before he had product market fit. He has product market fit. He hasn't been able to cash out anything before he was able to show that not only did he have product market fit, but that he was also able to design a go-to-market strategy and build a sales and marketing strategy and scale it to tens and 20 and 30 million of revenue. And I think I think the tokens provide a really interesting way of allowing teams to bootstrap their expenses and let early participants, participate in the upside of the protocol. But there's got to be a new way and a new level of transparency on how much of the tokens are going to founders, and how much they're able to use prior to full product market fit before they've actually delivered a product that's going to justify that. And so, finding a model where these tokens can be applied in a way that isn't such a strong departure from how these risky venture startups have happened before. I think finding a good balance there, I think will be really critical. But if you can look, I'm 100% convinced that if you can make $5 million by launching something that doesn't have product market fit yet, and then you're supposed to just convince yourself to stick around and grind it out for the next 10 years that are really hard, it's just not going to happen, right? People are going to walk away. They're going to say it's centralized now, and I'm no longer responsible for it. So I think the tokens can be really useful for bootstrapping a company and not just having to spend all of your money with Google AdWords, but it's going to have to be, someone's going to have to create a better model. And I don't know what that model is. So I'm just kind of saying there's a problem and not providing a solution, but there has to be more transparency about where the tokens go, how they're being used, and the lockups on those, I think, first and foremost. And then I think essentially at some point, token vesting contracts that are triggered based on some kind of measurable outcome in terms of true product success, whether that's transactions or fees or whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure. I think, tokens definitely unlock that ability for teams to fund themselves, for early community members to participate in the upside, and to fundraise. But there needs to be a better mechanism, like we saw in the ICO era. I don't think we've made a lot of progress since then. It's okay, you launch a token, you sell it, and then the incentives for the teams are if you raise a lot of money from a token sale, the incentives are just not there for you to just deliver. I think we do need a better system, like vesting periods for tokens. And I think there are teams building this so that it can be done in like an automated smart contract enabled way. So, I mean, that's in progress. But beyond that, I think for the token to actually, be sustainable, it needs to be used in a real way. And I think that's the big issue with these protocols is most of the time you're sticking a token when it doesn't need to be there. And so it's hard to just maintain its value because, it wasn't ever supposed to be launched in the first place.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why and this is one of the things that kind of inefficiencies in crypto that we think we can capitalize on is we think that a lot of teams are forced to, they launch it. First of all, again, like I said, we try to differentiate between what should be a protocol, which needs a token because you have governance, and what's an application. And I think what you see is a lot of teams take the easy way out. What they're building doesn't need to be a protocol. It's an application. They launch the token, then they have to fake decentralization because this token exists now, and then they have to make a bunch of bad UX UI trade-offs. And so, Terra's in a situation where we can't launch tokens, but I'm glad that we can't, because we have a token. It's Luna. Everything we do is for to make Terra more useful, which will accrue value to Luna. But then we don't have to worry about these fake decentralization trade-offs because we launched this token. And so that's an opportunity in the market to build a better application. And that's, one of the gaps we want to fill.
Yeah. No, I think maybe it's an advantage that you have this constraint of launching tokens. Maybe it just forces you even more to build something that's actually useful and not just attracting users because there's some token incentives, but you'll have no users tomorrow. Yeah. So who knows? Maybe this this limit that might feel like a constraint now is something that takes off and is an advantage in the long term.
Yeah, it definitely forces discipline. I mean, we did have a treasury left over, so it's not like we're destitute. And so we have money to work with, and that's an advantage. But look, if I could leave you with anything, the token, I mean, we've already been through hell with this token thing, right? So everything we're doing now is super focused on the long term, because the worst thing that could potentially happen is that we just have launch a token, it pumps, and then it dumps again, and we're right back where we started. Most of us who are at TFL are here to kind of rebuild not only the ecosystem, but our reputations, and to prove to everyone that this wasn't all bullshit. And so, everything we do has to be focused on long-term sustainability and not another failure. And so, I think tokens are really good at pulling forward demand. But we all know where that ends. If you accelerate all the demand because you pay people tokens, then it always ends the exact same way. And so, not only regulatorily do we not need to launch a token, I think if it would be contradictory to our aims, which is long-term sustainable growth. And so,
and so to end the podcast, I mean, that's a lot of pressure that you're under to, like you said, prove to everyone that what you're involved in is worth, something, or is not a failure. Recovering, making Terra recover, but also mending your reputation. I mean, that's a lot to be taking on. So what would be a good measure of success for you? By the end of this year, where would you want to be?
That's a good question. I think so I'll take a step back and talk about 2023. In 2023, when Doe stepped down, I got together with the team, and what we decided was we have two objectives for the rest of this year. Number one is survive. Let's hold together and survive this. And number two, let's figure out how to build again, right? We just lost our head of product and the guy who was the driving force behind everything that TFL had ever built, right? And Doe. So let's prove that, number one, we can hold this thing together, and number two, that we can build useful products. And we were a little late because most of our products launched here at the beginning of January, some of the stuff that we were working on, but we were able to do that, right? We were able to rebuild the company with new people in place to lead products and an entirely new way of running the company. And so I think in 2024, it's getting it out to people and getting usage on it and proving whether or not these products are what people want, and whether our specific vision of cross-chain abstraction and application versus protocol and usefulness is going to resonate in the market. And can we actually build something useful? And so I think we've already had decent feedback from within the smaller kind of Terra and Cosmos community. But I think in 2024, what we want to do is get back to, I call it the main stage. But can we make those applications work for everyone beyond Cosmos? And And so I think if we can see some crossover to like EVM chains and other places, I think that would be a good measure of success.
Amazing. Chris, thank you so much for this interview, for going through your experience. I mean, such an amazing story, and hopefully a comeback story. But TBD,
yeah.
We'll definitely be covering it and watching. Really, thanks again for being so open about all of this, about your lessons. This has really been a really interesting conversation.
All right, thanks. Enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me.
Here we are with Chris Amani. We're recording a follow-up to our interview that we did earlier, because Terraform Labs filed for bankruptcy a few days after we recorded that initial interview. So here is an update on that filing. So Chris, thanks for doing this follow-up.
Of course, glad to jump back on.
So cool. So for brief context, Terraform Labs filed a voluntary petition in Delaware for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This happened, I believe, January 24th, sorry. So, I mean, first question is, why did you decide to do this? It was a voluntary decision to file. So, yeah, what was the thought process?
Yeah, so, we've been evaluating options to ensure, well, let me take a step back. So I think we discussed on our last call how the SEC had already won on summary judgment for the securities violation for Luna and UST. And so the penalty for that was potentially pending the outcome of the fraud case that we discussed on the previous show. But once it was clear that there was going to be a penalty for those securities, for the securities violation summary judgment, and that potentially that penalty could be larger than the current assets that we had on hand, we started evaluating different kind of strategic directions we could take that would ensure that we would be able to continue to operate normally while we appealed that decision. So this turned out to be like the most this turned out to be, I think, the best solution for that, to ensure that we can continue to maintain operations while we go through an appeals process on that.
Got it. Okay. So how big could that fine be for the securities violation?
It's hard to know. So there are a lot of different ways you could measure losses, I guess I would say. And so it's just impossible for us to tell until it's handed down. And I think there will be an entire process around determining what that fine would be, or what that penalty would be, but that wouldn't take place, I don't think. I think we believe now that it'll take place after the rest of the trial concludes.
Okay. So by filing for bankruptcy, that would protect Terraform Labs from having to pay out that fine?
Yeah, I think what it would do is basically allow us to continue operating. Ideally, it would allow us to continue operating while we appeal that decision. And it just kind of adds an orderly process to any of the creditors we might have at that point, if the fine is determined to be larger than the assets that we have on hand.
So you'll appeal that decision. In the case that the ruling still rectifies what the SEC said, and you still have to pay that penalty, what happens then?
Yeah, it's hard to know. So I'm learning a lot about the Chapter 11 process myself. Obviously, it's not a place you would expect to be with a crypto company, especially one like ours. And so, there are a lot of different potential outcomes there. I think the role of a bankruptcy court in the U.S. is to determine what the best outcome is for creditors. Right. And so there are definitely scenarios where, the optimal outcome for us is one in which, the bankruptcy court determines that the TFL and the assets that TFL owns are more valuable with TFL continuing to exist rather than to be liquidated. And so there's a lot of potential outcomes that could happen. It's hard to predict what, that's probably a year plus away. So it's hard to predict what it would look like.
And who are your creditors at this point?
They've all been listed. I won't go through them name by name, but you can find them on the filing that we put out.
No, but in just like general terms, like not specifically, but are they investors in Terra, like as like a category, I guess?
Yeah, there's like the typical stuff you would expect to have where they're just people you owe money to on the day you file bankruptcy, that are just kind of normal operating companies. And then there are just, commitments that we have that could potentially be considered creditors, but we need to sort through all of that through this process. We've just done kind of like the initial first day hearing, and then there's a lot more work to be done to like sort all of that out.
So what if the court decides that your assets need to be liquidated?
Look, I think that will be a decision for the court.
But in that case, what happens to Terra?
Well, I think the way to think about this is, that's essentially a situation we were facing regardless of filing this Chapter 11, right? Like, and we talked about this a lot, I think, on our last conversation, right? Is that the big inflection point for TFL and for Terra is this fraud trial. And if we can prove our innocence in that, and obviously, the reason we wanted to chat was because, we hope people cover that trial and we hope people look at the evidence for themselves. And so, the filing of the Chapter 11 doesn't really change what could potentially happen. It just gives us more options in a case where a penalty is assessed that's greater than the value of our assets. So if there wasn't a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, there would be no option for potentially continuing operations. And so it would just be, almost certainly automatic liquidation. And so what the Chapter 11 bankruptcy process does is give us, potentially more options, but it doesn't like introduce a new risk of liquidation that didn't exist before leading into this trial, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see. And so you declared in the filing that you have between 100 to 500 million in assets and the same amount in liabilities. Can you give more specifics on that at all?
No, I can't share any more specifics on that. I know that's kind of a broad range. That's a big range. But I think more specifics, during this bankruptcy process, everything will be incredibly public. So more specifics will almost certainly get out. But for right now, that's the most I can share.
Okay, so what would the ideal outcome of all this be for you?
I mean, the ideal outcome is that we, win on these fraud charges. Obviously, we look forward to everyone kind of covering that case, and then we can appeal on the securities charges, and then we come out of this, with no penalty. I think that there's, as it relates to the securities charges, I mean, there are a lot of questions about the SEC's jurisdiction over crypto assets. And so there are ways that those could also get resolved independent of our specific case, right? You have Ripple, you have Coinbase, you have a lot of different other things happening in parallel. So I think there are a number of different paths to resolution on that one. Obviously, we'll pursue our own. But yeah, I mean, ideal scenario is that we win on the fraud charges that have been levied against us, and we are able to overturn the securities loss.
And then on the other hand, I guess, the worst case scenario is you lose on both. And in that case, you'd have to liquidate your assets to repay creditors and pay the penalty.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, yeah, I mean, there would be an appeals process. So like if we were to lose all the way through, then, it would be up to the court to determine what the disposition of the assets would be.
Right. And a lot of your assets are in Luna.
We do have a sizable Luna community grant, definitely. So it's complicated. It makes the situation complicated, right? Because as we mentioned in our declaration, killing TFL, as you remember from our last conversation, we airdropped all of the tokens from the relaunch of Terra to holders of, Luna Classic and UST, right? And so the entire relaunch of the Terra chain and the reason for TFL to continue to exist and to continue to operate was to help rebuild, everything that had fallen apart in the DPEG. And so, there's a question for that, I'm sure will get addressed by the bankruptcy court of like, is it, what purpose does killing TFL actually, what purpose does it resolve, right? When what we're doing is trying to rebuild the Terra ecosystem. And so, I think the market cap of Luna right now is 400 million. That's all shared by the original holders of Luna and UST prior to the DPEG. So.
Right. So if you had to liquidate your Luna holdings, that would obviously, potentially, but pretty surely impact the price, which would obviously be bad for holders.
It's complicated. I don't know how it. I don't know how it would work, right? Like the holdings that we have, by the way, in Luna are vesting over a period of 5 years. So there's no way to liquidate them right now anyway. It's all locked in a smart contract.
Any other way that this filing would impact your roadmap, your plans, anything that we discussed on our previous interview?
No, I think it's just important to note, like, this filing only gives us more options than we had prior to the filing, right? Like, we were still facing all of these same kind of existential risks. We've been facing down existential risks since essentially the day after the DPEG, right? And we just keep building and shipping through those. So, this is kind of a strategic move to ensure that, TFL could continue to operate and support the ecosystem through any kind of appeals process. And so, obviously, like, the word bankruptcy, the word Chapter 11 comes with a lot of connotations that make it sound a little bit more like the end of something rather than the beginning of something. But, if you learn more about the process, it's really about trying to find a way to enable companies to survive through challenging times. And so this just gives us another set of tools, I think, to continue to operate and to support the ecosystem while we get through this trial.
Okay, well, really appreciate you clarifying all of that. I think there is kind of that connotation, but it's. I think the main point is what we talked about on our previous interview stands, kind of this drive to continue building. And I think that's a super interesting story. So
yeah, the team's still here. We're still building the same products and we're looking forward to, continuing to ship more. So yeah, thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it.